All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility for Learning Conference. We've got our second session going up here. Megan and Jess were absolutely fantastic in that first one. Great way to open the day. And I feel so grateful to Farzad for this one, who I know is just going to be a fantastic presentation and conversation about L&D as a catalyst for real change. It kind of like piggybacks on Jess and Megan's conversation really, really well. Farzin is somebody I've had the pleasure of speaking to a couple times in the past. Every time, just eye-opening. You need to follow him on LinkedIn if you can. He is an organizational justice consultant. Critical Equity Consulting. That's right. And Rubina Halwani, who, thank you, Rubina, if you're out there. Thank you so much for bringing Farzin to our attention. And Farzin, so glad that you're a part of this event. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and just hide myself and let you take it away. I know you have a presentation all ready to go for everyone. So let me know if you have any questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Luis. My name is Farzin. I'm traditionally a DEI consultant, but lately I've been referring to myself as an organizational justice consultant for several reasons. One because it sounds cleaner, but two, because it kind of drives home a little bit more impact. And that's the topic of today's kind of the next session here. So I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to welcome everybody. So when Luis and I were talking, I was cognizant of the fact that I didn't want to kind of overlap with a lot of the talking points that a lot of the other speakers were saying. And one thing quickly, I have a little bit of a lung sort of congestion issue, so I might step aside to cough here and there. It's been lingering for a little bit. But one of the things that we were talking about was a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the DEI field that people aren't responding to, and initially responding to well, but in the long run, it's kind of people are getting exhausted by it. People are getting exhausted by the lack of accountability, by the lack of true impact. So the thing we're going to mainly talk about over the next 30, 40 minutes is you as L&D people who are taking on the role of training in diversity, equity, and inclusion or organizational justice. You have a certain degree of responsibility as well as you're designing your interventions, as you're designing your trainings, to make it real, to make it impactful, to make sure that what you're doing has solid and positive impact in the short, medium, and long term. So that's what we're going to kind of get into. A little bit of a background on me. I started Critical Equity last summer. I have a background doing DEI work in higher education, local government, corporate sector, and I have a number of different clients from different sectors, from trade associations to private and nonprofit. So shout out to the person from Virginia who was that, Kristen. So so that's me a little bit. I partnered with a good friend of mine, Ulduz, to do some data analytics work, people analytics work, to kind of boost my data-led approach to this work, which I can speak endlessly about, but the idea is to kind of inform the interventions in the future to, again, make them more impactful without relying too heavily on quantitative data, right? So that's where we're at. But let me dive right in. So I have a few points here that I kind of want to go through that kind of guide me and ground me in how I organized and design my trainings. And a lot of them have to do with first placing emphasis on outcomes as opposed to intention. We hear a lot of this about intention is irrelevant when it comes to impact. You're outcome focused, and a lot of the DEI field is starting to focus more on these outcomes as well. Even the definition of equity over time is slowly changing from centering opportunities to centering outcomes, fair outcomes for all, and outcomes that are defined by those individuals who are you're developing your interventions or targeting your interventions toward, right? So let's start with the first one. So don't reinvent the wheel, right? You can definitely go, if you're kind of entering this area, you can definitely go do those. There's a lot of like DEI certifications, trainings, courses and stuff. They're wonderful. They're great. But not all of us are able to kind of in the outset start doing, kind of get a certificate that can often cost thousands of dollars. So what I've always found useful, and we'll talk a little bit about this, and I'll show you how to do this, is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of information out there about organizational science, how people interact within organizations, how people interact within societies that transition. There's transferable skills that when you're operating in a democratic society, how you operate in your organizations. So there's a lot of information out there. What I think initially for y'all that usually, and I found this to be most impactful, is that taking that information, that body of information, which is more often than not catered toward people who have middle-class upbringings and usually white, right? And usually male. And so taking that information and then adding the equity lens to it, right? And I'll show you how to do that. So that's the first thing that we'll talk about. The second thing is like pretty much the gist of this is that, is it real or is it performative? You might have heard the term performative a lot lately, and that's because a lot of these studies are popping out that say, that are asking the question, is anti-bias training actually effective? Is training on combating microaggressions really doing anything? And that speaks to the fact that there's not a lot of accountability after the training is complete, right? So, and majority of this I found is that the trainings that I've been a part of, and when I was first starting, seemed to be very surface level, right? And that's where corporate America was at that time, and that's where organizations were at that time. They're starting their journey, quote unquote, right? We don't have time for that anymore. We never had time for it. I mean, these are things that I'll talk about that we should have been talking about for centuries. We should have learned in elementary school. This is U.S. history. This is society. This is our reality. That somehow, as we enter the corporate space, we have to water it down to appeal to the comfort of leadership. My appeal to you is get that out of your heads. That's done. We don't have time. There's a lot of issues that are happening in this country, and a lot of it can be appeased or at least mitigated or hopefully change through the workplace, where you spend 8+ hours of a day of your life, right? That is a place for organizing. It's a place for finding meaningful connections and finding a journey toward growth, right? So always ask yourself when you're doing something, is this real, or am I just doing this how much have I watered this down? So we'll talk about that. Place this, and piggybacking on that, place the strategies in context. There's a lot of trainings out there that'll tell you a lot of things on science, like the science of cognition, the science of bias, and you're like, okay, cool, this is really cool, right? And then you learn, okay, so saying everybody has bias is kind of like saying everybody's a brain. Like that's how things translate in our minds, right? We notice patterns, those patterns stick, those patterns influence our decisions. That's not profound, right? Putting into the context, why am I learning this, right? Why am I learning this? So putting into the context of history, of societal interaction, and also in the context of, most importantly, power, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. Don't assume that we're not ready for this conversation. That was 10 or 15 years ago. Like, how we're not ready for that. We're just going to kind of ease into this. We're going to make sure that we're not freaking people out. Look, there's a lot of things happening, right? Turn on the news. We are in a very bad shape with a lot of different things. Every time I turn on the news, there's something with regards to climate. There's something with regards to racial injustice. We have a responsibility as members of society, and also part of the organization itself, to effectively design interventions that have those outcomes, right? And your organization is not separated from that society. When I talk about society, I talk about your organization. It's a part of it, right? So you have that responsibility. All of us have that responsibility. Those with power have that more of the responsibility because they have the platform and they have the power to change. But we all have to do our part. So we are definitely ready for that conversation, right? It's serious stuff. Sometimes you go to these things and they tend to have like cool, like fun activities and stuff. I mean, great, right? Like, I think if it resonates with some people, but don't let it distract from the seriousness of the conversation. We're not talking about, just like minor small talk in the office and how to kind of navigate certain things, right? We're talking about real serious issues that have influenced pain and harm over centuries. So, we have to keep it somewhat serious. We have to keep it intentional. And another thing I will say that, as we're doing this, and it kind of goes back to a lot of the things that I've been saying in the past, is in the previous bullet points, is that don't let this be like something that you churn out, right? A lot of education, and trainings and things like that is you develop a training based on the parameters that the organization sets, and then you produce it on a very quick turnaround, and you replicate and you scale, and well, it's part of the production cycle, right? My appeal to you is be very intentional about what you're doing, right? Just like if you mass produce fruit over time and make it bigger, right, it loses its flavor. Think of these trainings in the same way. You have to put intention behind it, and you have to put like some degree of reality behind it, so that people understand, and they accept it, and will understand the gravity of it and do something about it, right? Otherwise, it's just a few interactions. Okay, I learned how to do this, I learned how to do that, I'm going to forget about it in 2 weeks, which study shows that happens. But if you put it into context of how serious this stuff is, how sinister it's been over time, it embeds itself in your mind more, and you act upon it, right? You change the framing, you change the individual person's philosophical view of all of this stuff, and come from an area of justice, right? It's not surface level anymore, it's deep. And of course, you want to give plenty of time and space to unpack these things. They're very heavy. A lot of time people will enter a space of dissonance, and like what they grew up knowing is being challenged in this moment, and that's okay, right? We have to give space for that. We have to give space for unpacking. And that's where the good conversations come in, and that's where people really truly learn, is that they got to kind of peel back the curtain and then see the reality, right? It's otherwise that curtain is that performative aspect of things that I'm talking about, that you don't want. That you want to see reality for what it is, and see how hard people have it when they're trying to go for jobs, seek promotions, seek pay equity, all these things, right? So let's dive in. So real quick, I wanted to kind of share with you, a lot of the time, we tend to start off with ground rules, and apologies. So ground rules, right? Ground rules are basically a way of managing the conversation, that if it steers off course, or if people start saying things that are problematic, you can point back to the ground rules, because it's something outside of you. It's, here are the rules. Here's like, I'm not saying this, it's the rules, right? So like, point back to that. But another thing that I like to do is I like to describe the themes of my conversations or the trainings up front. These are the things you're going to see, right? And these are real deep, heavy concepts. And as you introduce them in the beginning, over time, it'll start to make more and more sense. I'm not going to go through all of them. A few of them I think is beneficial to you is really emphasizing the role of education and training as a tool, not an end goal. Education is putting your shoes on to go for a walk. It's not actually going for a walk. It's not, the going for a walk part is operationalizing that knowledge, turning it into interventions, and then measuring outcomes, and then readjusting over time, and then eventually getting to a place where it's becoming embedded into the organization, right? Another one at the bottom is recognize the power that you hold in every space you're in. So one of the most central things of a lot of the things that I talk about is power, and I talk about different dimensions of power, where you hold power. It can be within your organization, like the tenure or job title classification, and it can be societal power, right? We're not watering things down. We're speaking to reality. I have a certain degree of power as a man that enters a space. I don't necessarily have to speak for the patriarchal point of view to be present, because that's what we're swimming in. We're swimming in a patriarchy. So even if I don't say anything in that moment, right, that my point of view is still present in the room, right? That's how systems work and operate, right? It's beyond us as an individual. It's out there. So like, it's important to kind of get people to recognize, hey, we're not, the traditional DEI training has talked about everybody coming at the table as equals, equality, like all this stuff about equality. Equality is the end goal, right? It is what we're trying to achieve. But in order to get there, we have to discuss equity and we have to discuss justice to be able to get to a place where history no longer influences somebody's trajectory, and that's equality, right? So those are some things. Another thing that I talk about is where you're placing the urgency. So it can be, let's get these interventions done. Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's change our pronouns in our emails. Like, okay, those things are great. But sometimes we may design interventions that have unintended consequences. So the urgency should definitely be at the buy-in stage. Like, we need DEI. We need to figure out things aren't going well. We need to do something, but be very deliberate, intentional about your training, about your interventions, to ensure that, and then make sure the right voices are in the room to ensure you don't have those unintended consequences. And this is what I mean about don't reinvent the wheel. This is a classic model of vantage points. I'm not going to go into it, but basically shows you, excuse me, different layers of designing strategies for how your organization operates, from your value system all the way to the individual independent strategies and tasks you assign, how you assign them, all these things. You can have an entire lecture about this. You don't necessarily have to change this, right? This is how organizations in the current space operate now. We don't have time for this, but there's an entirely new area that's emerging out of DEI where we're slowly starting to talk about distributing power in the organization, drawing lessons from cooperatives, drawing lessons from flat organizations, and that kind of thing. That's a little bit separate, but this is still applicable to most organizations. My appeal to you is that you don't have to necessarily change this, but apply the equity lens to it, right? Who's being left out when we're designing this intervention? Is somebody being harmed? If so, stop it immediately. Let's figure it out. And so you're reviewing these models now through an equity lens, and you're incorporating history, and you're incorporating that individual's particular relationship to their upbringing, and then their experience in the workplace, that culture's relationship, and then talking about it in societal terms. And with that understanding, then we have a better outcome, because we're including everybody, and it's not just designed for middle class upbringing, right? People with middle class upbringing. So you don't have to, there's a lot of trainings out there. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars, as long as kind of you're learning. I get a good philosophical grounding, get a good historical grounding in a lot of this stuff, and then apply that to the existing models. Obviously, you can develop your own. But for starting out, I want to kind of share this with you. I don't want to toot my own horn, but I posted this a while back, and it got a lot of engagement, and I found it very kind of interesting, because basically I posted about the difference between real and performative. Like, what is a real intervention? What is a real bit of knowledge? And then how does it become, when does it become performative, right? And it got, there was probably only one or two people that were like, this is a little too extreme. But the thing that I wanted to kind of share about this was that, when answering the question, are we there yet? Are we ready to have this conversation? It's beyond that. People are starved for it. People are starved for reality. People are starved for accountability. Like we want it so deeply. And I mean, think about like how government operates. When you have a bill that is introduced that, wow, this is really going to change things, and over time gets watered down, and different interests are included, and it just kind of, at the end of the day, it's just like a corporate mess, right? Where it's funneling money into the hands of people who don't need it. I mean, the same kinds of things happen in the organization. So things get watered down over time, and then they become devoid of the intent, original purpose. So make sure you're make sure you always have that original intent or design into that intervention. Now, obviously, you're going to take time, and you're going to change things, like as you bring in. That's okay, but is the question you want to ask is what are the outcomes of this, right? Is this real? Is it going to do things? Is it going to change somebody's material reality? Or is it just going to give them a nod, like, hey, I see you, I hear you, but at the end of the day, I'm going to go back to doing business as usual. That's what performative is, right? Who's benefiting? Who's being harmed? And lastly, I think we kind of touched up on this, but am I valuing the comfort of those with power or the needs of those who have been historically harmed? We do this all the time. Like in the DEI area, our primary focus is to appease those at the top to make sure that they're not uncomfortable. And my appeal is, as a steward of this field, DEI, and as a steward of basically, society, like you're a part of society, we can no longer afford to do that, right? We have to make it impactful. We have to have results. So, yeah, I mean, ask yourself, like, when you're designing something, is it a temporary feel-good thing? Which I'm not saying is bad. I'm saying, but if that's the target of your intervention, it's going to become performative, and then you're going to continue seeing all of these HBR reports come out and say, is DEI actually working? Are these trainings doing anything? Because there's no accountability, there's no outcome, there's no focus on the outcome. It's all, we have good intentions, but we're not measuring the outcomes. Putting things into context. Like I said, there's a lot of trainings out there about bias, about human cognition, about how we process information. Very fascinating stuff. It's all in the human mind. But what we don't do well in these things is put it into context, right? Somebody who's the president of the United States, or an autocrat somewhere around the world, has so much more power that you are giving power to their biases as well. So you're giving power to what they know, and you give them power what they don't know, and you give power to what they're ignorant to, and they make decisions based on those biases. Whereas, like, an individual contributor in your organization doesn't have that degree of power, right? And that's why power is important, because, like, as you're designing these interventions, it's always like, oh, everybody's got bias, everyone's doing this and everyone's doing that, and it ends up over time becoming an excuse, like, oh, that was just that person's biases. Well, no, you have power, and your power allowed you to influence somebody's life, probably, right? Depending on the kind of promotions. Like hiring decisions and things like that. Christine, that question, start with outcomes. Yeah, you can do that. Future envisioning is very important in this stuff. Like, where do you see things? Where do you see ultimate equality? How do you see that looking like? And then design your interventions to kind of get there, right? You can do backwards design. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Another way of putting things into context, putting it into the system of oppression that we're all a part of, right? I can have trainings on specific microaggressions and why they're bad, but what really truly resonates is finding the trajectory of how those stereotypes and microaggressions and all these things came to be, and what purpose do they have? It's an expression of power. It's an expression to make somebody feel less than. And that has historical roots. And when you talk about these things from colonization to how these mythologies were formed to justify the theft of land, labor, and capital and wealth from other peoples across the world, it becomes sinister. Microaggressions become that much more like, oh my God, I'm contributing to a system of oppression when I do this. It's not just, oh, I was just joking. It's part of a long historical legacy. I'll give you an example. There's a great article, a couple great articles about the term laziness in the workplace, and how like these individuals have traced it back to times of enslavement, when you wanted to maximize output, you want to maximize production from those who are enslaved. You refer to them as lazy. Well, they're doing the labor, you're not, as the slaver, right? So these things have trajectories. In any culture you're a part of, you can more than likely than not find a historical link to these types of stereotypes, right? To be able to kind of determine what were they designed to do? What kind of power are they expressing? So when you do that, when you put those things into context like that, when you talk about like the history of biases and like de-emphasizing implicit bias and actually talking about how historically this was deliberate, this was intentional, right? It drives much more impact. It's also resonates very well, excuse me, when you talk about Rubina. Yeah, I'm pretty much close to being done. We'll have a good solid portion of time for Q&A. So one thing is that that always kind of resonates with a lot of people is that when you talk about how these things also impact somebody's life, right? Physical and mental health. It's like we emphasize like microaggressions kind of specifically influencing like somebody's mental health and care and things like that, but they actually have physical consequences, right? They have people who experience microaggressions over time have higher rates of heart disease, higher rates of heart attack, all these things, right? Talk about this. Make it serious. Make it as serious as possible. Like, these are human. These are your colleagues. These are your coworkers, and they're being harmed, and we're just we're letting it happen, right? And so kind of that influences a little bit that the philosophical core for me to be like, I'm gonna try my best to stop doing this stuff, or when I see it, I'm gonna intervene, and then I go into intervention strategies. I go into bystander training from there. I think this is the last slide. Another thing that I do kind of give space for is the role of terminology as evolving, right? We think of terms to describe a certain reality, right? And they don't always apply in the future, right? One of the reasons being is that in the past, we really haven't had the opportunity to have public discourse on these things. So now we're just getting into it. So we're thinking of terms, and they come up, and then after some time, they become watered down. They become devoid of its original purpose, and then we think of a new term to kind of replace that. A lot of the things that I hear when I'm doing these trainings, like, oh, I got to learn that now. I'm like, okay, don't worry about terminology first off. Learn the concepts, but take a little bit of time to kind of understand why these things happen, why we invent new terms, why those terms of the past don't describe our current reality, or if or why those like terminology like was not there wasn't that terminology in the past because we didn't have that in the public discourse, and now we finally have this opportunity to have these conversations. We're thinking of things and we're kind of contextualizing, and then we're realizing, oh, it doesn't apply. Language evolves, right? Give space for that. Give space for these terms. So, I have BIPOC kind of in big lettering here, and there's a movement to kind of, and BIPOC stands for Black and Indigenous People of Color, which was designed specifically to highlight the experiences of Black and Indigenous people vis-a-vis other people of color as the worst affected by history in this country, right? Over time, people started to use BIPOC interchangeably with people of color, and then it became devoid of its meaning, and then almost, right, unless you're actually intentionally, forcing it. But now there's a little bit of a backlash. Like, if you mean people of color, say people of color. If you are discussing a specific community, just say that community, right? The name of the community. One thing, for me, for example, like that applies to me, for example, we are kind of in this phase where we're pressing against terms that are geographically relevant, and then talking about terms that are like actual like geography based, right? So the term Middle East and North Africa, MENA, or Middle Eastern, or South, like East Asia or Southwest Asia, are all I mean, not Southwest Asia, like Eastern Asian, but like all these terms like Middle East are basically relevant like to a location. So Europeans call it the Middle East because it's east to them, right? So now that's being replaced with Southwest Asia, North Africa, SWANA. I don't know if it'll catch on, but some people are pushing for it. The term Latinx was originally also designed to kind of gender Latino, Latina. There was good intent behind it. It eventually came to be realized that it is kind of English language colonization into the Spanish language. So there's a new term that has popped up, Latine with an E. It's not for me to say, what I'm going to accept and what's not. It's for me to kind of sit and listen and give space for you to determine what's best for you, because you haven't had these conversations, right? In the public eye. I mean, of course, like, people have been having these conversations for a long time within their own communities, but give space is all I'm saying. And that is kind of the end of it. I'm going to leave you with a quote that I love. Feel free to read it on your own. But let's open it up to some questions. And I can go back to any of the slides and kind of explore any of them. But let's see. It's a good list of questions. So, Luis, do you want to kind of help me?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll jump in here and see. We can just go through these in order. Emily is asking, coming up in the DEI world are discussions of distribution of power. That is fascinating. I'd so like to have a chat with others about other things that are working their way up through the DEI agenda, future of DEI. Where can we do that? So, Farzin, do you have any resources at all where people might be having these types of discussions or conversations? I mean, your LinkedIn posts are pretty provocative as it is. And like you're saying, that performative post, I saw that one. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But anywhere else that you would recommend going?
So that's the thing. I think there's a few of us, and I don't know of any public forum that's kind of discussing this, but there are a few, and some people on this chat can kind of attest to this, is like that we've kind of created our own spaces to discuss these things. And so like the idea now is that DEI tends to be strictly focused in the identity realm, like the liberation of somebody's identity, authenticity, showing up to work. But I think for me and people who are kind of in my boat here, we're trying to push the conversation that DEI also has to have an element of labor rights, right? The physical material world, how much you're getting paid, is it equitable? How the types of tasks you're being assigned, is it the quote unquote housekeeping task? Are you being promoted? All these things in the physical reality realm, right, are things that DEI, I mean, I'm not going to say this for everyone. There's some great people out there that have already thought about these things that traditionally DEI has kind of overlooked over time. And so a lot of there's few spaces that like some of us are kind of creating, and hopefully like, I'm talking to some people to kind of also kind of create a forum for this that's actually talking about the liberation of both identity and labor, right? So usually the liberation of labor is something driven by unions, right? And unions tend to talk about racial equity not at the forefront. There's not all unions. There's some unions that are doing really good work in this. But what we're trying to do is marry these two worlds of DEI and labor rights. And so I mean, if you know of anything, feel free to kind of post it. Um, but I think it's kind of like it's in its infancy a little bit, these conversations.
Mhm.
Um, and also, it I will say it's something that kind of scares some people, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
you're distributing power. If you're a leader, what does that mean for me? And so, the conversation then goes to, well, how much risk do you take on as a leader? Imagine if some of that risk was also distributed, not only just power and decision making, but the risk that you're taking and being responsible for a decision, right? If that's distributed across the organization, there's a great weight lifted off your shoulders, and that means that you don't have to become an expert in every single thing. You can do your part, right? You know, and so it's bubbling, right? Um, but no, these conversations are definitely popping up. And last thing I'll say to that is that it's not pie in the sky idealistic stuff. These types of power shared arrangements are popping up all over the world.
Mhm.
You can look at Netherlands, you can look at France, Spain, you can look at Canada, China, Brazil, cooperatives, even the United States. There's quite a lot. Like, people are moving their money to credit unions, and all these things are popping up like that, where power is distributed. There are companies out there. I know of some in Europe. I don't know in the U.S. except for one, Project Equity, which based out of Chicago, they help organizations, the workers of organizations, buy out their companies and distribute that power and wealth throughout the organization much better. So you don't have those, like, CEOs making 350 times the lowest paid individual contributor. My argument is, in these situations where power and wealth are distributed, you have better automatic DEI outcomes. You're already building in psychological safety because power is shared. You're automatically building structural equity, right? And the interventions are much easier for a DEI. It's not going to eliminate the role of DEI because the legacies of past systems and historical knowledge influence themselves. Like, you're still going to have racialized thoughts, whether you know it or not, in these new systems. So that's where the DEI practitioner comes in. We talk about human relations and that kind of thing. But you're automatically building it for better outcomes because you're not worried about what your leadership is going to say if you do something like this, or if you put this idea out there. Like, that
Right.
fear, I think, is one of the biggest things in power sharing distributive organizations. You don't have to, most of the time you don't have to worry about that.
Right. No, definitely. And I do want to add, Emily, Rubina posted a link to her Slack group that she started. It's a DEI forum where those conversations are happening now. I have checked it out. It's worth joining her Slack group. And also, just this event is kind of the beginning of an effort by myself and others in the community to try to help, like, I don't know, just inspire more conversations within L&D. And this is just the beginning of it. The reason it's called Ideal 21 is because I'm going to be doing this annually. So if you're interested in pursuing more conversations like this, let me know, and we can, maybe you can host some, and we'll go from there. Kristen is asking, Farzin, are there any examples you can share of L&D doing harm to marginalized groups?
I mean, the examples that I have are anecdotal. I don't want to kind of, I don't want to put anybody out there, but the main thing that I saw in harm, even with the best intentions, I will say, is that when you're kind of designing trainings, and when you're designing these interventions, typically in the past, and like I said, like, I would see that these trainings would typically, like, put things into context where everybody was coming at the table in the same basic, like, at the same place, right? We see those images of the racetrack where somebody's starting out further and then somebody has more hurdles to jump over and that kind of thing. These are the newer conversations. But back when I was first starting out, I would listen to these things and I was like, yeah, this is cool, but this isn't for me, right? Or this isn't for my colleagues. Like, do you know how much more like energy that they have to take to put in to be able to get to what you're talking about, right? And so from there, we started to realize that DEI trainings and DEI interventions were very individual, part of the toxic individualism of American capitalist culture. Like we're trying to teach the individual to navigate systems of oppression where we should be dismantling systems of oppression. Let's talk about the environment that somebody's in, right? Let's talk about, let's talk about the toxic workplace that influences toxic behaviors. I don't like using the term toxic, but for the sake of time, will make sense for people. We didn't used to talk about things like that, and so I've made it a deliberate intention to stop talking about individual psychology and talking about the systems that we create, right? So, granted, there might be some people that come into a good place and kind of tend to do things that harm, right? I'm not discounting that, but that has been overemphasized, right? Most of the time, it's the system that we've built that's a legacy system, that more often than not favors. And this was because of the returning GIs after World War II. Like the workplace has only minorly changed since then, but they created value systems and structures that benefited whiteness and and maleness, right? Certain characteristics that were valued more than others were typically, like what you think of alpha, whatever, male behaviors, right? Very aggressive, very pushy. You're trying to maximize output, and then that's why like a lot of these things like white supremacy culture have. By Tema Okun, you can look that up. That's a great resource. Not perfect, but it's a great jump off point. That's saying that these things are valuing white dominant culture, right? And we have to, if we want to create inclusivity, we can't just band-aid on top of that. We have to actually uproot that system and create an inclusive culture on top of that. And individualism is part of that, right? Yeah, it's as a team lead, you want to cater interventions and cater things that you're doing to meet the needs of those individuals, but that's in a very local thing. In the L&D area, you also have to focus on the operating system you're in, right? The operating system also influences behavior. I would argue more so than an individual's particular drive or their particular orientation, right?
Absolutely. Gosh, Farzin, there are so many questions in here. Last session ran late and we could probably run another hour just asking you questions about this stuff if we had the time, but I want to give everybody a break but thank you so much for this presentation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I highly recommend everyone make sure that you follow Farzin on LinkedIn, and just Farzin, if you ever have any additional resources where you are hosting conversations or doing anything like that, just doing discussion, let me know. I'll continue to promote your voice. I just love the things that you have to say, and I really appreciate you sharing with us today. And hopefully we'll see you at some point in the next few sessions that we have coming up.
Hopefully, inshallah. This is great. Thank you all for joining. Great conversations, great questions. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in the next one. Star Peterson is talking about who is your diversity program leaving out. Star is absolutely amazing. Can't wait to see that one. So we'll see you guys there after the break. Bye, everyone.